Hi, welcome. On this video, this will be part 4 of navigating the relational approach. On my last video, part 3, I ended on talking about gaining insight. The reason why you want to strip everything away to get down to a level where you start to really gain depth into how a dog's mind is governed and influenced. Because ultimately, here's the thing: it's things can get in the way of that. They become barriers, and so these barriers. When you put these barriers in the way, and then you start to invest in using certain devices, and then you dovetail in this ideology, what happens is it keeps you just at an appearance level. This is why things, and this is the problem with appearances, is it will appear to fit at a certain level. And this is why, again, people wonder why the blame always gets shoved off on dogs. And a lot of these dog behavioralists will go into this thing about the genetics of dogs and all this other things. Here's the problem with that, and I'm going to mention this, is that I deal with this stuff all the time. I deal with these throwaway cases, and once you really understand how this stuff lines up, it's consistent, which means that how I approach training at the relational level, it does influence in a very intentional, predictable way. It does influence how a dog thinks in such a way that anyone that goes on about these things about genetics of dogs, these dog behaviors, I know right away what they're doing, because their ideology bottoms out. I want you to understand that it can only go so far, and so when you look at that, it's almost, I look at that and I'm like, I can't even believe this stuff's going on, but they believe it, and the people who buy into it believe it. And the reason the people buy into it, believe it, is ultimately, even at a more subconscious level, they don't want to change how they think. I mean, there's so much going on here, and people wonder how these dynamics set up to cause what has caused this culture blame shifting, and then ultimately why there's so much divisiveness and things have gotten this bad. Well, ultimately that's what's happening. But anyway, getting back to this issue about navigating the relational approach and kind of staying on track there, is that, again, I talk about the issue about stripping away devices. And the thing that people have to or need to understand is that when you look at from the journey that I was on, and going back many years ago, I did use certain devices for a period of time when I was starting to ask questions. And of course, when you start into dog training, it's going to play off of how you already think. Okay, so your thinking processes will align themselves with going towards certain approaches. So there's a depending on how people think already, that really plays a big role into what you accept. I mean, there's a real bias with people's emotions and all those things. But when I started into this, in a little history here, help you understand that people assume that I haven't looked at things a certain way at a certain level, and they're certainly wrong in that. I certainly have. Many years ago, when I started looking at how things were not lining up, I said, man, there's a problem here. You just at the appearance response level, there's a problem. This is not, and why is it not lining up? Is it really truly the dog's fault somehow? I mean, that's ultimately one of the big things. Is this really a problem with the dog, or is this a problem at the core level with training itself? What is, and so really through this whole journey, bigger questions will pile on. Okay, you have to understand, if you're not asking bigger questions, I would suggest there's something wrong. Because ultimately, here's another point I'm going to make. This comes down to a personal choice for each individual dog trainer, whether or not you choose to just follow the crowd, and get caught kind of on one side or another that way. And again, I talk about this issue about why it is that trainers have such a difficult time figuring a lot of this out. Because again, there's things in this that will really take people's legs out. I want you to understand that there's things that, and then you have to make a choice. You go even deeper, even beyond just a certain level. Say you go even deeper than that. Say, man, what's going on here? This is like, do I just kind of shift the blame still, or do you really want to know what training is and what is going on through this picture, through response, and how that sets up? So there's a level of critical thinking that has to be applied here. But again, going back to my journey, is I did use certain devices. In fact, I did work within, believe it or not, within the learning narrative. When I first started into training my first police dog, but as I went through all that, even using a pinch collar at one point, trainer that trained me, he was using a remote collar on one of his dogs for a period of time. I looked at that and just said, man, that's interesting. But again, what I was doing all the time, I was like putting things to the side and saying, okay, is it about this device and how's that? So as you go through everything and you hit a certain level in training, and again, I think it's really important that people understand that to gain insight too, you got to be pushing. You got to be going beyond. You got to be challenging yourself at such a high level to shake loose from, from whatever ideology is holding you back. You really got to be doing that. So ultimately, again, I'll make this point really clear. It comes through really a high level of experience, but it's a character issue. I truly believe that, although, you'll see a majority of trainers, kind of coming into agreement with certain things, but even within balanced training, just look at the confusion. Okay, I mean, if you step back from all this and really start asking certain questions, I mean, as a trainer, you're going to see certain things. You're going to say, man, what is the right way here? I mean, it's like everyone can't come into agreement. Everybody is get this one group, it appears, and this other group. And what's even balanced training? I talk about all that. But anyway, getting back to this whole thing about, it's really important to understand it's absolutely critical that, as a trainer, you strip everything away. Because here's part of the problem is just taking my word for whatever, because I can talk about certain things about response and motives of dogs and all these different things, but at the same time, it's got to parallel your own personal journey with putting everything to the test. Okay, that's really important. In a transparent way, because everything I put out there is, it's above board. It's really, even if you go through, again, I mentioned this, go through my videos, I don't just talk about what training is and talk about this issue about response and motives. You'll see the method being applied. If you look at, that's why, again, I'm real intentional about, doing training, showing the process from day one right through. You'll see day 2, day 3, day 4. But you'll see at the same time it done in such a way that the motives of the dog are being tested at all points. Okay, done in a transparent way, done in a meaningful way. Because here's the problem: a lot of trainers that put stuff out, you're not seeing that. You're seeing these infomercial type of videos that doesn't give you the clear picture, and then in that you'll say, wow, there's something wrong in that. I'm not seeing the full picture, and then people wonder why isn't this stuff, coming together. But anyway, I'm going to do part 5. I'm going to talk, this video is just kind of dovetailing into some of these issues. But again, the goal of this series is really focus in on the relational approach. But again, it's impossible to talk about the relational approach because part of the problem is it contrasts off of what people already are doing. So I talk about over and over again, you'll hear me talking about the same themes throughout, because when you're doing training, you're coming from something. You've already invested in something, typically as a trainer. and it's going to be highly challenging. So ultimately, you have to be able to frame it up properly in order to move forward from that. So anyway, thanks for watching. Again, I'll be doing a part 5 here shortly.